G'day guys, Solid here and welcome back to another video. Today I wanted to discuss all things unicorn motorcycle. Why am I talking about mythical beasts? Well, I really wanted to define what exactly I'm talking about and you so commonly talk about in the comments section. It is a very hot topic, so I wanted to define the topic, talk about the reasons why we haven't seen one from the manufacturers yet, why we've had to wait so damn long, and I also wanted to talk about why you don't need to wait. There are plenty of motorcycles out on the market that with a little creative thinking and modification really can be turned into your dream bike so you can get out on the trails as soon as possible. So let's discuss this mammoth of a topic straight after the intro. So Solid, what the hell is a unicorn and why are we discussing mythical beasts? Well, in a nutshell, a unicorn is that mythical motorcycle, that ideal bike that we wish a manufacturer made, but they didn't. So that is the crux of what a unicorn is. And there are two clear candidates for the title, and I think they both equally deserve the title and are both unicorns. Basically, I'm going to use an example here that's a little bit clunky, but it's the best I've got. Take a KTM 350 EXC or a WR250F and basically make that bike a little tamer to smooth it out just a bit for the highway. Extend those servicing intervals out to about 2,500–3,000 kilometers. Keep everything else the same on the bike, but give it a wide ratio 6-speed gearbox so it can sit on the highway comfortably, and maybe if you're feeling generous, throw in a cush drive. I think if a manufacturer did that to a lightweight, high-performance dual sport, a lot of people would just lose their minds, myself included. I would just say, shut up and take my money, and there'd be one in my garage as soon as I could get my hands on it. But it hasn't happened, hence we're sitting here talking about unicorns. The second bike is in the adventure bike category. So there's a gap between the middleweight adventure bikes and the small displacement adventure bikes, and it hasn't been filled. So what am I talking about? Well, it ends at the T700 by Yamaha and the KTM 790 Adventure R and starts kind of around the KTM 390 Adventure. There's a gap in the middle for about a 150–160 kilo lightweight adventure bike with high-end suspension and decent performance. Think about a Dakar bike. So that's basically taking a 450 Enduro, giving it bigger crankcases so it can hold more oil, the full fairing so it can do long distances in relative comfort, but it still really can hammer off-road. So there are a lot of guys that want that rally replica, small, lightweight adventure bike that just hasn't really been made by a major manufacturer. There's the AJP PR7 and there's the CCM GP450, but they're a really small market. But have a look at those bikes if that's the kind of thing you're looking for. But those two unicorns really haven't been addressed by major manufacturers. So let's get into why that hasn't occurred and why it isn't just the manufacturers but the consumers as well. So let's get into the next section. So let's start with the consumer. Given that we're all in the same dual sport community and we absolutely love this, sometimes we forget that we're in kind of an echo chamber, or we're all kind of in a little bubble. So it seems like everyone in the world wants this motorcycle, but really we're just a tiny little teardrop in the ocean in the off-road world. We're a very small minority group is what I'm saying. It appears that we're large because we're all together and discussing it, but if we're dispersed out amongst everyone else, we're really not that high in number. So from a manufacturer's perspective, they really want to be able to sell the most amount of bikes to the most amount of people, and selling a unicorn motorcycle really targets down into a small minority group. So from a business perspective, it might not look too fantastic on paper at first glance. So I think that is one takeaway to remember, is that manufacturers are gun shy because they don't think the numbers are there to support making this bike. I don't think that's correct. I think that just over the years, the manufacturers have really not bothered doing their research properly into what people actually want. They've kind of half met the criteria, half not, kind of play it safe, and they haven't done well because of it, and then they take that negative feedback as, oh, people don't really want that kind of bike, when in reality they do. They just weren't happy with how poorly the manufacturer went about it. So I think that's the whole loop there with the consumer problem. The manufacturer problem is more the macro financial system. The economic outlook for a lot of manufacturers is not to take too many risks. Now, I think there's two separate markets that we need to talk about. We need to separate the Euro off-road market from the Japanese off-road market because they're two separate entities in my eyes economically, and I'll discuss why. The Euro guys haven't made a unicorn basically because they don't need to, and they just don't need to bother. They're making so much money from the enduro motorcycles and high performance adventure bikes, especially in the enduro world where they're making their ready to race bikes. People are racing from amateur to pro levels. There's high turnover because everyone wants the edge in the racing world, as well as the attrition from just breaking the bike. So there's always going to be high demand for the newest and the best. So why do you need to look elsewhere when you're making money hand over fist on the enduro market? Why do you need to look at a smaller minority group to sell to, and you're going to have to make a bike that makes less performance and possibly dilute that high performance expectation that comes with your brand that you've cultivated so well over the years? Then comes the Japanese reason, and the reasons why they haven't made the unicorns is the economic outlook of Japan now. But basically Japan have been in a slow, almost 30-year recession that isn't common knowledge, but it is a fact. It's very hard for Japanese motorcycle manufacturers at the moment to justify taking risks. So that's why you've seen a tendency from manufacturers like Yamaha and Honda, Kawasaki and Suzuki making multiple bikes off the same engine and chassis platform to save money, to make the most amount of motorcycles and take the least amount of risk. So they're really trying to mitigate costs everywhere, and that means mitigating risk in their eyes. Okay, so let's talk about the bikes that are actually available on the market right now that can easily be turned into this ideal bike for each category. So let's start with that bike that straddles the distance between the Enduro and the dual sport. So kind of where the WR250R ends and where the CRF450L starts, that gap between dual sport and Enduro. So obviously those two bikes are at the top of the list. The CRF450L from the Enduro world, it has that wide ratio gearbox, it has a few bits on it to keep the engine a bit quieter and a bit more comfortable on the open road. So it definitely makes a great platform to make it a little more dual sport ready. All you need to do is get a big tank like the Nomad tank and you're basically there. It really is quite a capable bike at doing a lot of things. Its one downfall for a lot of people is the entry price. Yes, it is fairly expensive, but you got to look at the kind of components you're getting with it. The suspension you get on the CRF450L blows anything out of the water in the dual sport world. So you don't have to throw that suspension in the bin. It's quite good already. You're saving money in the long run, but you've got to put more in up front is how I would think about it. That's a very reductive view of the CRF450L, but basically it has a lot of potential, and if you want something that makes a lot of power, has a lot of performance, but you want to be comfortable riding to the trails, I think that's basically your main option. Your secondary option, if you're lucky enough to be in a country that has it still, is a DRZ400E from Suzuki. That's the way I've currently gone. It makes plenty of power, particularly with its low gearing out of the factory with 1447. It feels almost similar to the 450L in its performance. Its main problem is that gearbox though. It's so close ratio that it really is horrible out on the highway. So you will have to spend a lot of money in addressing that if you're keeping it for the long run. It also is about 8 kilos heavier than the CRF450L, so you keep that in mind. But you can do things to lighten the weight. But it is a very capable bike. The pluses are that it has a longer service interval than the CRF450L, much longer if you don't ride it too hard. It also has all the accessories in the world available for it and a big knowledge base. The last bike in the soft enduro bike category that I think really has a 100% legitimate claim in that category is the WR250R, which has now been discontinued by Yamaha, which absolutely breaks my heart, as this was a bike I owned for 5 years and absolutely loved. This is super lightweight. It has the gearbox to sit on the highway all day. You can take it towards the lightweight adventure bike with the big tanks and the fairings, and you can also make it a soft enduro bike as well because it is so lightweight and the way that engine is revvy and responsive. It doesn't have much bottom end, so that's a criticism to keep in mind, is it is low in torque, so that doesn't always make it the easiest to get the front wheel over logs and obstacles, so keep that in mind. But everything else about the bike is pretty decent. If you are really pushing it towards that soft enduro, you will have to address the suspension at some point. It's capable, but it's definitely not up to enduro standards. So that's another bike to keep in mind. One that's kind of on the cusp that I think has potential is the CRF300L. Now, I'm speaking lightly about this bike without too much confidence because I haven't ridden it myself. The problems I see it having are that weight. It is 140 plus kilos, so that's going to be to the deficit of that soft enduro riding. But if it can keep it down low and you throw out that suspension that has the rigidity of mashed potatoes, I think you've gone a long way to making it capable off-road. You could probably focus on a few more things to lighten it up and get it sub 140 kilos as well. And you could possibly have a bike that does that light enduro that has a little more torque than the 250R and can take its place since it's being discontinued. So I think that 300L can do the lightweight adventure bike stuff easily, and it has the potential to be that soft enduro bike between an enduro and a dual sport. So does the KLX300, but given that that's not coming to Australia, I don't want to touch on that too much. And they haven't really put in as much effort as Honda have with the 300L. So those are basically the major bikes that bridge the gap between a dual sport and an enduro bike. The other tact to take is look into the enduro world. That is something like a KTM 350 EXC, maybe even an SWM RS300R, and look at ways you can kind of modify those bikes to make them easier to live with in the dual sport world. So maybe get a bigger crankcase and clutch covers so they hold more oil. Look at putting a cush drive rear hub and addressing the lower gearing on them. And those bikes can really be turned into a super lightweight adventure bike. Now, I've shied away from doing that because that is the road that requires the most amount of money, as enduro bikes aren't cheap, and then the modifications required to get them to where I want them is not cheap as well, but it can be done if you're happy to spend the money. The next category is that lightweight high performance adventure bike, and this one's harder to pin down because a lot of people have a lot of different opinions. You're going to have people saying it needs to be a single, no, it needs to be a twin, it needs to be under 150 kilos, it needs to be under 180 kilos. It really has a lot more variance than the other unicorn example. So basically, I think you've got a couple of options here. You can start from the dual sport world, and I think the obvious candidates are the KTM 690 Enduro R. That includes the Husqvarna 701, and you've got the DR650 as well from Suzuki. Those are the bikes I think you're going to be best off turning into your lightweight adventure bike. They have fairing kits available for them. They've already got decent gearboxes for the road. They make plenty of power. There is mod after mod available for all of those. They're all still fairly light, at least for the adventure world. So I think you can take that dual sport ability into the adventure world, give it a decent fairing, a few other adventure mods like its ability to carry the luggage, do some power mods, make it more durable, and the DR650, the KTM and the Husqvarna all make great choices as lightweight adventure bikes. You can also come from the adventure world, so you can get yourself a 790 Enduro or a T700, try and shed a few kilos and learn to handle the bigger bike. That is certainly one way of going about it, and you'd be surprised how capable those two bikes are off-road. It can be done if you're willing to learn the quirks of the big adventure bike. Of course, there's the third option, taking a small displacement adventure bike, something like a CB500X, and throwing a rally raid kit at it. You can do the same for the GS310, and I'm sure you can probably now do the same for bikes like the 390 Adventure from KTM. So put some spoke wheels on it, throw some money at its suspension, and you've basically got yourself a bike that is a whole pile more capable. It still is sort of light. You're certainly not going to get DR650 weights, but you're going to get fairly close with the comfort of a twin engine. So those are the bikes I think are probably the best candidates for the unicorn bikes. I'm sure there's some bikes that I forgot off the top of my head. Chuck them down below. Maybe you've gone on a journey and you've modded a bike that's really thought outside the box and you've discovered the miracle bike. So chuck that down below. Give your case as to why your bike is the fantastic unicorn motorcycle. So that's about it for this video. I really wanted to leave you on that positive note, as there are plenty of bikes that you can turn into your ideal bike. Don't let it hold you back from getting into the off-road and enjoying the fun right now and getting the experience. So as always guys, don't forget to hit that like button, share it around with your friends. Don't forget to stay shiny side up, and I'll catch you in the next video guys. See you later.